Today's video is all about adding fractions with unlike denominators. This standard is usually introduced in the 5th grade. However, the concept of adding fractions should not be new to students. At this point, they should have experience adding fractions with like denominators, which they are exposed to as early as 3rd grade. Before we begin, let's review some key vocabulary involving fractions. For example, we have the numerator, which is the number above the fraction line. The denominator is the number below the fraction line, and we have unlike fractions. Those are fractions that don't share the same denominator. And we have equivalent fractions, fractions that have different numerators and denominators, but are equal to the same value. Now, here are a few concepts that students need to know in order to be successful when adding unlike fractions. First, they must be able to recognize an equivalent fraction that is equal to 1 whole. As we see in the example here, 3/3, 8/8, 12/12, so on and so forth. They must also know how to find the least common denominator, or in other words, the least common multiple, as shown here. Understanding this concept is especially important because students must be taught that in order to add fractions, the denominators must be the same. So knowing how to find the LCD, or least common denominator, is a must. And they must know how to simplify or reduce a fraction. Another thing to keep in mind, and is a teaching best practice, is to instruct students on how to add unlike fractions using concrete manipulatives or pictorial representations first, as shown in this example, then introducing them to the traditional algorithm. Feel free to refer to this video for details regarding this best practice. Now, let's get into how to use the traditional algorithm to add unlike fractions using just 4 simple steps. When teaching students the traditional algorithm, it is good to provide them with a step-by-step guide or anchor chart similar to this one to ensure that they don't miss a step. We will often refer to this guide as we solve each problem. In the first example, we have 2/3 plus 1/2. Remind students that since the denominators are not the same, we have to make them the same before adding. For step 1, I have students rewrite fractions vertically as they would for whole numbers. This is not a requirement, however, I've noticed that having them do so makes it easier for students to show their work. For step 2, students need to find the least common denominator of the fractions by doing some work off to the side. They can write the first 4 to 5 multiples of each number to find the smallest number that they have in common. In this example, 6 is the least common multiple. And you may notice that some students may get into the habit of multiplying the denominators. However, doing so may not always yield the least common multiple, as we'll see in other examples. Step 3, each of the fractions must be renamed using the common denominator to make an equivalent fraction by multiplying by a fraction of 1 whole. Another way to help students reason on which fraction of a whole is needed to make an equivalent fraction, they could think to themselves, what number times 3 equals 6? And since 2 is multiplied to get the denominator of 6, it must also be multiplied to get the numerator of 4. The same applies to 1/2. Since 2 times 3 equals 6, then 3 has to be multiplied to the numerator, giving us 1 times 3, 3 being the numerator of the equivalent fraction, 3/6. Now that the fractions share the same denominator, we are ready to move on to step 4, which is to add the fractions, giving us a sum of 7/6, an improper fraction that can be converted into a mixed number of 1 and 1/6. In this next example, we'll be adding 2/6 plus 1/4. Recognizing that the denominators are not the same, make them equivalent fractions before adding. Step 1, we'll rewrite the fractions vertically. Step 2, we need to find the least common denominator. Students again may simply multiply 6 times 4. However, there is a common denominator that is even smaller. So let's go ahead and do some pre-work on the side. As we can see, 12 is the least common denominator. Now we're ready to move on to step 3, which is to rename each fraction using the common denominator of 12. And if students have difficulty determining the numerator for the renamed fractions, encourage them to think of it as an equation. Think to themselves, 6 times what number can give them 12? In this instance, 2.
and whatever's done with the denominator must be repeated with the numerator.
Repeat the steps by renaming the second fraction 1/4 as well.
Now that we have renamed the fractions, we're ready to add.
4/12 plus 3/12 gives us 7/12. So we know that 2/6 plus 1/4 equals 7/12. Here are a few helpful reminders. Sometimes students end up with a sum similar to these, an improper fraction or a fraction that needs to be simplified. It is important to stress to them that their work is not complete. They should always convert an improper fraction into a mixed number or simplify a fraction when needed. Be on the lookout for my YouTube Shorts videos explaining how this can be done. And as always, thank you for watching, and feel free to share with your colleagues. To continue to support my channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, take care.